This is a podcast about new crops. You're going to love it. Join us on The Cutting Edge, a podcast in search of new crops for Wisconsin.
Welcome to The Cutting Edge, a podcast in search of new crops for Wisconsin. I'm your co-host, Jerry Clark, with the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension in Chippewa County. I serve as an agricultural educator. And my co-host today is Carl Dooley.
Yes, thanks, Jerry. Carl Dooley in Buffalo County with UW-Madison Extension. So, Jerry, we're here in late August. Things are kind of winding up with small grains. How did things go in Chippewa County this year?
Well, yeah, Carl, we've had our small grain trials here for several years now, and I think the yields were average. I would say, we had quite a bit of rain early in June, and I think that might have flushed out some nitrogen that we had in our sandy soils. So yields, I thought, would have been better, but we also had a lot of weed pressure this year, too. So I think the yield is average for what we've seen, but it's been a good year in terms of precipitation.
Yeah, and our spring grain yields were were pretty good, but not super. Our winter barley plots this year were pretty incredible with our yields, with our high being, we probably averaged about 90 to 95 bushel on our winter barley plots, with the high being 180, which was pretty incredible, which kind of makes up for 2019, which was zero because we had nothing survive the winter. So I think we got a little bit of learning to go that, and maybe that's a future podcast for us. Today we're gonna head a little bit different direction and talk about naked barley. It's a nationwide project. I think there's 4 states, if I remember right, involved, and we have 3 guests with us on this podcast, and I think we'll have our guests introduce themselves, and maybe we'll start with Bridget, who's kind of the overall project manager, I think is your title, or correct me if I'm wrong.
That'll work. So I'm Bridget Meintz, and I'm a postdoc at Oregon State University in the barley breeding program. And my primary job is to manage this national project on developing multi-use naked barley for organic farming systems, which is a project funded by the USDA NIFA OREI grant.
And Pat will stay in Oregon if you want to just give us a little background and how you're involved with this project.
Yeah, well, thanks, Carl. Our interest in naked barleys goes back a long way, and as I've often said, it's time that barley shed the hull after 10,000 years. The wild barleys are covered. They do have an adhering hull, and so naked barley just offers so many opportunities and removes so many obstacles that I think limit the wider scale adoption of barley. And just a word about the naked, relating to barley, that's the botanically accepted term for a barley that does not have an adhering hull. It is not of prurient interest in the least bit.
And Lucia.
Hi, I'm Lucia Gutierrez. I'm the cereal breeder and quantitative geneticist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I'm also working on this project as a co-principal investigator. I think it's a fantastic project. And I think it could be an alternative to bring more barley back to Wisconsin.
If we just step back, Pat mentioned that naked barley is the accepted term. At first I thought hulless, but why get away from the word hulless? I think I know.
I'll dive into that one and then let Bridget go, because she's really got, I think a lot of insight into this topic. And for me, it's a grammatical matter, because then you start going down this rabbit hole of hold and dehold, and do you have a hyphen or don't you have a hyphen? But Bridget, please.
Yeah, so basically, originally we were calling these things hulless and hold, and I noticed when I was shopping at, our local co-op in the bulk bin, they would have their naked barley labeled as hulled, and in fact they meant dehulled. And so there just seemed to be a lot of confusion around the terms. And so, we sort of changed our own language, and I think it's made it clearer, but also perhaps a little more interesting to people. Our latest release was Buck, and I think people have enjoyed that Buck naked barley.
You mentioned something, I know Pat said about the opportunities and for growing it, and maybe Lucia from Wisconsin can also chime in. But what is that? What is the market for it? I mean, is it for more the flour? Is it for beer? What are we looking at to use it for, versus maybe the barley that we think of for feed and cattle feed and that kind of thing?
I can start at least
Sure.
generally, and then Lucia can talk more about Wisconsin. So, naked barley actually arose from a spontaneous mutation, like 8,500 years ago. So it's been around for a long time, but it's been traditionally used primarily for food for human consumption. So without that adhering hull, you don't have to do any additional processing. It can be eaten directly as a steamed grain, milled into flour, rolled into flakes, cracked into grits. There are a number of applications, but if that hull is attached, it's not very palatable. And so in order to eat it, you would need to pearl it first, which is an additional processing step, as well as it removes some of the bran and germ because it's a polishing process, and it's pretty hard to just remove the hull. And so you lose some of those additional nutritional components, and it results in a product that can no longer be considered a whole grain. And so food has really been the primary use for naked barley traditionally. It still remains a staple crop in certain areas of the world, the Himalayan region, Andean region, Ethiopia, areas where other grains won't necessarily thrive at really high altitudes, and barley will. And so that's where a lot of genetic diversity in naked barley can be found. But this project is looking at using naked barley additionally for feed and malt. And so, it has some benefits as a feed for non-ruminants because they can't digest the hull. And so actually in the 1970s, Canadian barley breeders really latched onto naked barley as a swine feed. And so they did a lot of work breeding naked varieties for feed. And in fact, I think at its peak in the early 2000s, there were about 750,000 acres of naked barley being grown in the Canadian prairies for feed. And so that is another use. It hasn't really taken off, I think, so much in the US, mostly because it seems like in Canada, the breeders really worked with animal nutritionists early on to work with farmers who were, had pigs. And so that fit into their system, and there was a lot of education there. And I don't think that happened so much in the US. I think also in the US, a lot of, rejected malt barley ends up as feed. And so,
So in the U.S. right now, that market would primarily be for human consumption on the naked barley side than for a agricultural commodity, so to speak, for the feed industry. So
yeah.
Okay, no, that helps. Thank you. Yeah, Lucia, anything on the Wisconsin side where you're seeing acreage expanding or anything like that?
I think that there is a lot of interest. One of the things that I really like about this project is involvement with, all of these stakeholders and the different groups that have an interest in the food area, in the uses as feed, and in the malting and brewing. And here in Wisconsin, we have a lot of potential. We have a very high interest of having some barley more locally sourced with all the breweries. And I think that's a potential market that is fantastic. So if we can bring it back and have more acres, that would be great. We still need, we have a way ahead that we need to pave until we can have it very good and good for disease resistance and stuff like that. But then there is also this new market on the food industry that is very interested. And we're working here with Julie Dawson, also at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the horticulture department, and she's the extension specialist. And we have been working together on having this baking trials. And so we partnered with Madison Sourdough, and we have been doing some testing and baking tests for this, especially the grain that came from this project, to see if there is interest from the bakers and the consumers on having some more products. And we did some pita trials and pita bread trials and some cookies, and there was a fantastic reception to see that, we don't want to release something that is not going to be ready for the market. And so we're working together in close partnership with them so that we can have something that we like, that is agronomically performing well, but also that will be received by the bakers, in this case, the brewers, the feed industry, and also the public.
Well, Jerry, I don't know about you, but I'm a little disappointed that we weren't invited down for the cookie tasting part of this project.
See, where was the donut trial or something?
We'll sure include you in the next one.
Okay, we need to get on that list. Now, are most of these varieties, are we talking spring varieties, winter varieties, or little of each?
We're evaluating both. So the first focus was on some facultative that will be able to withstand a regular winter, not a Wisconsin winter, and some spring, just mainly spring. We had the first 2 years, it was very devastating. The winter trials, or the winter or facultative, didn't survive, and those were very harsh winters. This past winter, we had a great success, and this was mainly, we selected some of the lines that we knew they were not going to do well in Wisconsin, and then some that showed a small promise that we cannot evaluate fully in previous years. We decided to evaluate them, and this was a good year. So we had a fantastic survival, and we had actual yield harvest this year from fall planted trial. So we're excited that we can also go that way.
Well, Oregon really doesn't have winter, do they?
It's a different type of winter, a lot of gray, a lot of rain. So we do fall planted barley really well here on the west side of the Cascades because we don't get those cold temperatures. And so we actually prefer to grow the fall planted barleys because typically the spring types we will need to irrigate. And so we can benefit from those rains with the fall planted and don't need to irrigate.
Now there are a couple other states involved. Could you mention who they are?
Yeah, so we also are partnering with the University of Minnesota and Cornell. And so we're really lucky to have all 4 states representing sort of the Pacific Northwest, the Upper Midwest, and the Northeast. And we also have made our trials available to other states who are interested. And so we had some interest from UC Davis. They grew one of our trials. And then we've had some international interest as well. So that's been pretty fun to see these varieties growing all over the world.
So you mentioned food, and well, we all know about beer and animal feed. So what are the main products you're looking at in the food industry? Is it mostly baking, or what's the focus on as far as food?
It's a range of things, and I would recommend that your listeners go to our website. So we have an eOrganic website for the project, because this last spring we released a barley zine that has some information on the project, as well as I think about 10 to 12 recipes that some of the collaborators on the project, as well as local chefs and bakers, mostly from Oregon, because that's where we produced it. But we have, recipes ranging from barley porridge bread to crackers to barley tempeh. That's a really interesting and cool use of fermented products from barley. We have roasted barley tea, which I know Pat is a huge fan of. Let's see, what else do we have in there? A barley salad. That's a really popular use of like the whole grain product.
So far, the project's focused on organic. Is anybody looking at growing naked barley conventionally? Or non-organic, I should say, whatever the correct term is.
No, we don't have any conventional growth right now. The main focus of the project was on organics, and that's where we've been focusing, but there is no reason why you couldn't grow them conventional.
Well, the main reason I ask is our biggest challenge with the whole malting barley project has been dealing with fusarium and Don. And we struggle even with the chemistry out there to keep DON levels low enough. How have been the DON levels in what you've grown, Lucia, in Madison area?
Yeah, that's the main problem for growing barley in Wisconsin is fusarium head blight and DON levels. So we have had a high pressure in most of the trials. We do have some lines that show more promising response and lower levels of DON. And actually the grain that we use for baking, those we had to pass the DON levels so to be able to bake it. And we were able to find some of them growing with low levels of DON. So some of the lines seem to be promising. And then there are some management that you can do to improve the level of the serum head blight.
Because what is the level of DON acceptable in the baking industry or the food industry? We have a wheat miller that they'll accept up to 2, but I was wondering, but they blend it, so.
The food barley industry doesn't have a lot of standards, so I'm not sure that there's a specific level for food barley. They may just be using the same level that's acceptable for malt. I'm not sure. I mean, we don't have fusarium yet in Oregon, and so it's not something that I deal with.
Okay.
But I don't know. Lucia?
I'm pretty sure it's 1.2 or 1. We try to have it below 1. But yeah, I don't know for sure. Sorry.
Oh, not a problem. Not a problem. I just, because that's, kind of my working on this project for quite a few years on malting barley. It's still one of my biggest frustrations is how do we get the levels down low enough, and organic provides some special challenges to that. I will say that our winter barley trials have been much better. We haven't had the naked barley winter varieties, but we generally are down to levels where we can sell it in winter barley. And so there may be some promise there. If you can get them winter hardy enough to guarantee a crop, at least most of the time, that would be great. That'd be great.
And, the literature suggests, and we haven't quite seen this come to fruition, but because the naked barley loses its hull in the field and a lot of the DON is supposedly accumulated in the hull, there may be lower levels with naked barley, but that depends on a number of factors, including how well that grain threshes and whether that's really the case in these specific varieties. And so one of the things that we'd like to look at is one of our larger panels and sort of go through it and see if we can't find different levels of resistance.
Sure. I did see we had a grower that grew a little, a half acre of one of the varieties last year of the naked barley, spring barleys. I don't know what variety it was, but he still had quite a few grains in there that had hulls on. What is the percent that you normally get that's truly naked or hulless, and what do you do with it if it's you try to separate that out, or how do you go about? Is there a processing method you go through to knock those hulls off? Or
yeah, so threshability is actually one of the things that we've sort of come to realize needs to be a major focus when we're breeding naked barley. And so that trait seems to be both genetically and environmentally controlled, and along with the genetic by environment interactions. And so we do see some lines that will come out of the combine and then even later the cleaner and have most of their hulls still attached. And so you can, use your fingernails to pop that kernel out, but that's not going to work if you're trying to sell it in like a bulk bin at a co-op. And so
kind of like shelling out hickory nuts in the wintertime.
Except
yeah, okay.
worse. And then we have other varieties that, 100% of the kernels will come out without a hull. And so, we can breed for that, which is really exciting. But we do seem to see that the moisture levels at harvest also affect the threshability. So the drier the lower the moisture, the better it threshes. And then if you get a lot that has a lot of holes in there, that becomes an issue. We do actually work with a processor here in Oregon that ends up semi-pearling their naked barley. So it's a really light pearl, but we still would love for them not to have to do that, because that additional processing step costs them money. As I mentioned before, you are removing some other components, and so it's not quite a whole grain. But again, they sell into bulk bins, and they don't want their customers having to deal with hulls every so often. And so breeding for that threshability is really going to be especially important for the food market.
Sure. Will a debeater knock a lot of those off or not? You ran it through?
Yes, to an extent.
Okay.
Again, that depends on the variety. So some of the hulls are more like papery and brittle, and some of them just are never going to come off unless you really just like beat the heck out of it.
So you mentioned the labeling part, or it's not a whole grain after that process. So is that devalue? I'm thinking as a farmer, say I want to try growing this here in Wisconsin, and I know I've worked with Lucia on some other projects to get the agronomy part of it down. But, in extension, we always talk about have your marketing plan up front before you dive into a new crop or anything like that. So, and if there is a failure, you have to sell it for cow feed or cattle feed or whatever, and you don't get that premium price. But is that that labeling, or that no longer a whole grain, is that dockage or whatever, that price huge when that happens, or if it would happen? Or how do you suggest a farmer look into that marketing part, that, well, am I going to be able to get 100% of my crop hulless or naked barley? It's not going to have any hull left on it, and I don't have to worry about it? Or is there other tricks to the trade to make this work better in a farmer's favor?
That's a good question. But I'm not sure that I have a very good answer for
fine.
that, because I think, there isn't, like with wheat, you have a set price, but there really isn't, that doesn't exist for naked barley. The market just isn't big enough. And honestly, I almost wonder, most of the barley that you see in the grocery store is pearled. And so, and there are farmers who actually contract pearled barley. And I'm not sure what the price point difference is there, but I think there's probably a larger market for pearled barley right now than there is, and that some of that may be an export market, but I would guess there's a larger market for pearled barley than there is for naked barley. I don't know if Pat looks like he's unmuting to maybe chime in on that.
Yeah, I just throw out a couple of marketing options out there. Is that, to my knowledge, one of the big and exciting markets for naked barley is Japan. That there's a tremendous enthusiasm for naked barley food products in Japan. And so particularly in South Idaho and parts of Washington State, there's been a big push on barleys to meet that particular market. Those tend to be high beta-glucan barleys. And so that's a topic that we can segue into, if you like, is beta-glucan content, because our efforts have typically been directed at kind of more modest beta-glucan levels. The other one is just purely anecdotal, but I had heard that a whole lot of Midwestern covered barley was going into pet food, of all things. And so that would be classic, 6-row malt barley, 6-row feed barleys, and that pet food market had emerged as a significant one for those barley. So that would be another option for nakeds there.
Yeah, I can respond a little. We have a miller in our county that they buy some barley, and it's all pearled, and it's all for pet food. And they flake some of it for, but none of it's for the human food industry. So I imagine maybe that could take away a step if they didn't have to pearl it. What about the yields? Yields comparison to other barleys? Close or as good, better?
The hull accounts for about 10 to 13% of the kernel. And so you are going to see a reduced yield if you're planting, two similar varieties side by side. You do make up for that in the test weight. So test weight of naked barley is equivalent more or less to wheat. But that being said, most breeders have not been focusing on naked barley because the food market is quite low. And so there hasn't been a lot of breeding done focusing on yield. And so, most of the current varieties are not going to out yield hulled varieties, even when you account for that 10 to 13% difference. But that isn't to say that it's not possible. We have naked breeding lines that yield equivalent to, or in some cases out yield our covered checks.
And here in Wisconsin, we have seen the same. So what Bridget was explaining is because there was not like on the hover barley, there was a lot of breeding efforts put into higher yields and also local adaptation. So when you do that, you have a premium and you improve the crop and you have higher yields. Because we haven't done that in naked barley, we haven't seen the same level of yields just yet, but there is no constraints that we know of that would prevent us from getting into high yielding. Once we start the breeding efforts and once we start to evaluate them in this type of environments and put more pressure there, we should be able to move it forward.
All right. Jerry.
Yes,
I thought you were saying something.
Oh, no, yeah. I was, since we're going down that agronomy track a little bit here. So it's planted very similar agronomically with grain drill combined with are harvested with a combine. Everything in between are fungicides typically. Well, excuse me, we're talking organic for the most part. So we're really not. But from a fertility standpoint, is that mainly using manures or crop rotation, legumes? How is the production practice? Because in Wisconsin we got a lot of dairy manure, and this might be a fit for a dairy farmer to add a different crop into a cropping system, coming off of alfalfa and these kind of things from the dairy industry, or using manures. But I'm assuming you got to be careful with that nitrogen rate.
So yes and no, depending on the market where you're sending it, right? The main limitation with the nitrogen with barley is if you're going to be selling it for the brewing industry, where we have a maximum level of protein that we can have, and therefore the nitrogen levels are very critical. So we have to be very careful. For the food products, that's not such a constraint. So that shouldn't be a big issue. In terms of the rotations that we have been using at the University of Wisconsin, we have certified organic land, and the first year we ran it on a rotation that was not so favorable, and it was coming out of another cereal. But after that, we changed to coming after alfalfa, and these were beautiful alfalfa fields, and the barley did fantastic. So we did not need to supplement any nitrogen with that, just out of the rotation.
So from an input standpoint, I'm sorry, go ahead, Bridget.
Oh, I just wanted to mention one thing, because you mentioned that, it would be drilled and harvested the same way. If you are growing naked barley and you want to maintain your germ, so for sprouting or malting or seed, one thing to think about is that the embryo is quite a bit more exposed than on a hulled barley or covered barley. And so adjusting combine settings is going to be really important. The embryo is pretty fragile and it's pretty easy to pop off. And so unless you're selling into a market where it doesn't need to sprout, in which case you can, use your combine as you would with a covered barley. As with planting, you want to make sure that your germ is high. And typically, I would probably recommend going a bit higher seeding rate on a naked barley, because there do tend to be some issues with germination and vigor, which is something that we're also working to breed for. But currently, we do see some naked varieties have lower vigor.
Okay.
I was going to come back to the nitrogen management bit just a sec. Is that in our particular environment, that's really a challenge because we lack appropriate rotations just because of our rainfall and so forth. And certainly in our research farms, unfortunately, we don't have the opportunity like Lucia to follow after a legume. And so we've been kind of locked up a bit into input replacement. And so then using certified organic sources of exogenous fertilizer, and that's clearly not economically valid. So in the bigger picture of things, we really need to be operating within an entire organic system that then involves the supply of nutrients, and then also will help us get a better grip on weeds, because weed competition and so forth is just absolutely essential. And a lot of our research work, just because we have small plots and so forth, just makes it really awkward, and we're not able to do the same kinds of things that growers might be able to do. So weed competition is certainly an important one, and I know Bridget and Lucia and their graduate students have spent like a lot of time trying to assess that. It's hard to get a grip on.
Is there a protein level that the food industry would like you to shoot for, or higher the better? I know the first year that we messed around with malting barley, we had no idea what we were doing, and we followed. They were all dairy farmers, and they threw manure on it, and we had 18.5 to 19% protein. Of course, nobody's interested in that except for animal feed. I mean, it's great, but the food industry, where would they like proteins be in this, or doesn't it matter?
So again, because it's a new product, I think that there is not like the standard where on wheat it's very clear cut where you want to have it. It's also, barley, it's not going to bake as a wheat. So you're looking for alternative baking products and not bread, just because of the gluten. And so I think that it's more flexible at this point, and there's not a hard set line of where they want the protein.
Okay.
But yes.
Because there are no set standards, you can get a bag of barley flour and it could have 8% protein, it could have 18% protein, and there's no regulation on that. And so, one of the things that we're trying to do with this project is, and with our serial chemist and graduate student here, is do some food functionality testing and food quality testing. So looking at, the lines from these trials, not just the ones that were grown here in Corvallis, but also the grain from Wisconsin and grain from New York and grain from Minnesota. And we don't have enough of all of those things to do all the full testing, but we will get some food quality traits measured on all of those. And then where there was enough grain, we'll have more functionality testing that will allow, we'll be able to write up descriptions for these varieties that tell bakers or chefs, if you get this variety, this is how it might perform when used as a portion of a bread or in a pita or in a cookie, for example.
Now, Lucia mentioned the word gluten. Could you talk a little bit about gluten levels in the naked barleys?
So barley does have gluten. The proteins are called hordenolins and hordeins, I believe, rather than gliadin and glutenins. But it forms the same sort of gluten structure as in wheat, but barley contains less of it, and it's a slightly different protein. So it doesn't form the same gas trapping properties that the wheat gluten does, and so you can't make a risen loaf out of 100% barley flour. It will rise and then collapse. And so there are, some traditional recipes that call for, I think, 100% barley flour, and they sort of resemble a little brick.
I was just going to say that's how all my bread looks when I do it. It's
and so, really good bakers can use up to 50% barley flour. I probably wouldn't recommend, I myself, as a very amateur bread baker, I probably wouldn't push it beyond like 10 to 20. But for non-risen baked products, I'll make 100% barley flour cookie. For things like muffins or scones, I'll probably go up to about 50% and likely lower than that, unless you're a really experienced baker.
Well, if I remember right, I came to Oregon a number of years ago, and they had some soft pretzels made out of, if I remember right,
yes.
out of barley that were pretty good, but that was also paired with some pretty good beer and mustard. So I don't know if that, I think they all have to be taken into account. We're getting close to wrapping up. Is there anything Lucia, Bridget, Pat, you'd like to share? I do want to ask you all a little bit is what's your vision for this, not necessarily the project, and you don't have to divulge any secrets, but what's your vision for where Naked Barley is heading and how fast or whatever?
So, one of the things that we didn't really talk about today was using naked barley for malting and brewing. And so currently that isn't really something that's done. There are a few craft maltsters that are malting naked barley, and it's being used really more as an adjunct or in very small quantities by some brewers. But I think it's a potential end use that really hasn't had a lot of exploration done. So there are some researchers that have started looking at it, and then either due to lack of funding or lack of the correct variety, it hasn't really gone very far. And so I think, there are some challenges. Certainly the hull does provide a natural filtration system for brewing, and it does protect that little growing shoot, but there are ways around that, and there's new brewing technology that may allow for successful brewing with naked barley. And one of the exciting things with naked barley is that hull doesn't contribute to potential alcohol. And so within that kernel, you see a higher level of what's called malt extract, or that's sort of the potential alcohol that can come out of that kernel. And whether that's actually realized in a brewing system is sort of yet to be determined. But there are some things about naked barley that could make it exciting for maltsters and brewers.
How about Lucia?
Yeah, as far as where we see this, I think that I'm excited to see more barley in Wisconsin. I'm excited to see more naked barley in Wisconsin. I think that the place for naked barley would be more as a specialty crop, and it's not, to become a commodity. So it will be for those products that would add value. And so I think that with that in mind, if we work on the agronomics to make sure that it's gonna be able to be grown here, and then we work with the industry to make sure that we do have a market, I think that there is tremendous potential. So we have a long way still to have this final product, but I think we do have now products that are working, and I think that it's just moving forward in getting it more adapted to Wisconsin and working in partnership with the market is what's gonna get it out there.
Pat, your vision.
Yeah, so Bridget and Lucy, I think, have really covered the really important and obviously key agronomic and production considerations. I would just throw out that the naked barley has also prompted us to consider ways that we can reach out to genetics, plant breeding, science, teaching, all the way from universities to K-12. And in fact, this OREI project that we have has an outreach component where we use both naked and covered barleys to demonstrate key concepts in breeding and genetics. So that's an important one. And then the other bit of it is that for the home gardener who wants to raise some barley, covered barley is sort of problematic because it is covered and you can't necessarily eat it directly, and you can't really malt at home unless you are willing to go the extra mile. And so we have a resource called the Oregon Naked Barley Blend, which is a mix of 700 plus different naked barleys that are of all sorts of different colors and types and shapes and forms. And we've sent that all over the world to people who can then raise their own naked barley, make their own selections. And it's really satisfying to suddenly realize that you're a plant breeder. And if you'd like, you can name the new variety after your grandchild or your mother-in-law or whatever strikes your fancy.
And that blend is available in 100-gram packets. If you would like some, you can go to barleyworld.org/ONBB, and my email address is on there. And you can request a packet, and I will put it in the mail for you.
Oh, cool. And in 8 to 10 weeks, you'll get it once it hits the mail, right? That's probably a little more political than I should have went. That's cool. I did. You sparked when Bridget talked about malting. You sparked one other thought that I had is reading more and more about people that are interested in malted grains for cooking, baking, whatever. Have you done anything with the malted naked barley and baking or cooking or?
A little bit. So, we have done some baking with malted barley flour. There's a shortbread recipe that may be on our website and is in the barley zine that I think calls for 20% malted barley flour. So that does add some natural sweetness. There's also been a little bit of work done on malted barley syrups, but I think, that's still an area where there could be a lot more exploration.
So maybe the next 3 years. I won't push you anymore on where you're going. So, Jerry, anything else that you?
No, I just I'd like to thank the guests, but if there's specific resources that you have that you could share with us, as we post the podcast, we will have a link to a bunch of resources for the naked barley topic. So please send those along to us, and those that are listening, go to our Cutting Edge website, and we will those links will be there under that naked barley topic, and you can we'd just appreciate all those any resources you have that we can share with our listeners.
Sure.
Yeah, and I'd like to thank all of you for attending. This was super, a lot of fun. I think we mentioned this when Pat was on before with our malting barley podcast. Someday maybe we'll all get together and have either pretzels or cookies made out of naked barley. We look forward to it.
As well as a naked barley beer.
Yes,
So,
no doubt. All right, there we go.
Right here on the cap, you see barley flavors. So
all right.
The glass, the loaf, and the head. So.
All right, and you're going to send us a complimentary hat, aren't you, Pat?
It's all coming your way.
Okay.
All coming your way.
Great, thanks again. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Later.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Brought to you by the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension.